Streamline modern Max Hassan's astonishing BSA 500. The rear hub is actually 7 pieces machined from billet aluminum and chromoly. I didn't want to see any part of the rear frame, or have cutouts for the chassis to pass through, but I still needed to be able to remove the rear wheel. So I designed the hub with the sprocket outside the frame. The solution is ingenious. There's a 3-inch diameter axle that can be slid out, allowing the rear wheel to drop out. The final drive is also unusual. I knew that the bike would need some type of jack shaft to line up with the outboard rear sprocket, says Max, but I hate the way they usually look. I did my best to come up with a setup that worked well, but didn't look like a mess and would have an integrated chain tensioner. You'd never guess it, but that imposing aluminum rear fender is Max's first attempt at car-style coach building. Like most builders, I usually work on parts you could fit in your home oven, says Max. So using 50x30 sheets for each side was a new challenge and a pain in the ass. It took him 6 days and 5 attempts to get it right. Max ended up lying horizontal on a stool with the sheet on his face, simply so he could reach the pedal of his shrinker. Most of the initial shrinking was done blind, so there was plenty of scrap made that week. The front end of the bike may look more conventional, but it's equally special. I tried to make a unique front suspension for each bike. This was carved out of 2x1 steel bars with a bandsaw and a grinder. All the linkages were made from scratch, plus the front hub, shock, and headlight. I always lean toward minimal and clean, so with the exception of the throttle, the handlebars are just for steering, says Max. The front rim is a 23-inch in the vintage clincher style, and there's a 19-inch Excel rim hiding under the rear fender. The vintage style Firestone tires are entirely appropriate for this style of bike. The robust single engine was 85% complete. So Max had to make a few parts that he couldn't find, like push rods and oil lines. Luckily, the owner's manuals back then were basically assembly instructions, with every single nut and bolt accounted for. The engine is incredibly simple. I built it from the bottom up in a day, eyeballed the ignition timing, and it fired up and idled perfectly. Once in a while you just get lucky. I have no idea what power it makes. It was a race engine before I bought it, with bigger valves and a little head work. But I'm not worried about the front coming up and scraping the rear fender on the ground. We see some unusual materials being used on custom bikes these days. Wood is definitely making a comeback, but Max's BSA steps things up a notch by using Pyrex heat-resistant glass for the oil tank. This isn't the first Pyrex oil tank I've made, Max reveals. And it was actually the last of 3 tanks I made for this bike. The first was brass and the second was aluminum, but neither fitted the look of the bike. When I went this route I knew there would be plenty of talk about the durability, but the last one held up well. I've yet to see a paint chip on any of my oil tanks, so I decided to go for it. It's rubber mounted and pretty tough stuff. Can it break if a rock hits it? Yes, so I'll just be careful when I take it off-roading. The shield-shaped headlight bowl hides a pair of 6-volt vintage General Electric bulbs. The tail light is a virtually invisible strip of 6-volt LEDs flushed into the backbone of rear fender. Max is honest about the riding experience. The BSA rides and sounds like an old tractor. But despite the heavy-looking rear end, it only weighs 315 pounds 143 kilos, dry about the same as a KTM 690 Duke, although the comparisons obviously end there. This machine doesn't have ABS, riding modes, or traction control. In a world governed by electronics, it's strangely reassuring to know that there are guys who can still shape metal the traditional way, by hand, and by eye, and create objects of timeless, enduring beauty that cannot be bought with the click of a mouse.